Hello and welcome to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We will, as always, start with a story.
As seas carve coastlines. My father was 13 when the war broke out. He was walking home from school one day in September 1940 when he saw one of the first Luftwaffe bombs fall from the sky over London. It fell not too far from his house. He thought little of it at the time. The next day, he and his 10-year-old brother were evacuated to Haywards Heath. Their 8-year-old sister was sent to Eastbourne. At the railway station, when he first arrived, people passed him and his brother by. We were a little annoyed. They wanted girls. Some say the first casualty of war is innocence, others the truth, but perhaps it's choice. My father wanted to study science A-levels. They were his passion. He ended up studying French, English, and Latin from scratch. He loved football, but there weren't any official teams to join. He and friends kicked an old footy about in Scrubland after school. He loved art. Art supplies were hard to come by. And yet, he looked back fondly on those times. He recalled with affection his school class chasing after their English teacher, Mr. Wilson, along country lanes, they on foot, the teacher on his bike. Mr. Wilson would recite G.K. Chesterton's The Ballad of the White Horse as the kids ran breathlessly behind. And so, during those early formative years of his life, the hedgerows and fields of Haywards Heath were his entire world. And far from home, with limited options and few luxuries, he learned some of life's essential truths. He learned of life's unpredictability, the importance of playing the hand you're dealt, the need to make do, the need to get on with things. His actions were informed by certain unspoken values, an absence of entitlement, a keen realization that life could be worse and that others have it far worse than you. Never take anything too seriously, least of all yourself. Nothing is ever as bad or as good as you think it is. The father I knew was never one to make a fuss. Indefatigably unflappable, he never lost his cool. An important quality, I imagine, when in 1973, the year I was born, he became headmaster of Britain's largest school at the time. One of the first purpose-built comprehensives, St. Kevin's in Kirby, Merseyside. It had over 2,000 boys. It was a tough job in a tough area, but he fell in love with the place. Old boys remember him more for his tea and sympathy than his reliance on the cane. One of his first changes as head was to get rid of streaming, which he felt lowered expectations and encouraged complacency. He hated the way those in lower sets were expected to do less well than the rest. He felt that teachers should be ambitious for every child. The war steered his life course. In his 58 years of teaching, he taught those subjects chosen for him by wartime, French, English, and Latin, along with history and Greek for good measure. And I, in turn, went on to share his love of languages and went into teaching. And so his wartime went on to shape me, and so back to the present. The current pandemic will shape as surely as seas carve coastlines young people today. We're right to worry about them, and much needs to be done. But I don't doubt they're learning many of the lessons my father learned through the privations of war.
Thank you, Ben. Before we start in earnest, a little note to anyone who is listening for the first time or anybody who has forgotten. My name is Stefano. I run Puck Creations and I am the regular host of this podcast. If the title, Storytelling with Puck, hasn't given it away, this podcast is all about stories, like the brilliant one you just heard from Ben. We will share stories, chat about stories, and see how stories fit in with the business world too. Of course, we can do that without our wonderful guests. So I've said his first name a few times, but let's start by properly introducing Ben Masters. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I'm a freelance writer. I write content and copy, mainly in education. I was an English teacher for over 20 years. And so that's been sort of good preparation for moving into sort of writing stories and writing content for clients. I still do a bit of tutoring to keep my hand in, and I do work on presentation skills, I do workshops in schools and the like. But like yourself, I spend most of my days chained to my laptop and sort of typing stuff. I feel a bit out of practice. It's funny because like yourself, A lot of time, sort of locked away at home, quite sort of introverted. And so podcasts, although I do one or two, it's sort of away from my comfort zone.
I understand that feeling. For people who have listened to some of the previous episodes of this podcast, they may have noticed a progression as I slowly become a bit more used to it. You mentioned there that you were a teacher before you moved into the world of freelance copywriting, and you still stick close to the learning world, and that came through also in your story that you just read, and in the idea that it was passed down to you, the love of teaching. You mentioned some of the things that your dad was really passionate about. Would you say that you have the same level of passion for things like the tears, for things like the way you explain with tea and sympathy rather than using the cane to get the message across? How would you say your teaching style relates, or is it completely different?
It's a great starting question. I think that the world of education has changed. I think in some ways my dad was quite ahead of his time, because I think we're a lot more tea and sympathy now. The cane disappeared, I think, in sort of about 80, maybe sort of 86, 87. Yeah, the physical cane. My dad could have caned if he'd like. I think he did actually his time. In fact, actually, my dad actually did cane. Two of my cousins went to the same school where my dad was the headmaster, and he did actually catch them smoking and did actually cane them.
Oh, really?
But all in all, my dad was very much tea and sympathy, and ahead of his time, because he believed in, quite a sort of child-centered approach and a more sympathetic approach, and seek first to understand. I think I was followed in those footsteps, but the world of education now is a little bit, thankfully for kids, I think they get a better deal in schools. We're a lot more aware of well-being, and actually, we need to entertain kids and engage them rather than just flog them. I think if we flog anyone now in schools, it's teachers.
Who's flogging the teachers at the moment? Is that you don't have to answer that?
No, I'm happy to happy to answer those questions. I think the state of education is very tricky and very complicated and very political, clearly, but teachers are very hard driven now with hyper accountability and a bloated curriculum. Yeah. And technology's not helped in some ways. Emails opened up, made them so accessible to parents. So teachers are spending stuff, firefighting in ways that my dad never coped with. And I didn't have email when I started teaching back in 97. So the world of a teacher, the day-to-day life of teachers is a slog, I think.
I don't know that many teachers, but watching the news and seeing the stories about the amount that you, when you were a teacher and your colleagues have to do, always makes me think that I would never want to go into that world, because although I quite enjoy teaching people, and with the very small bit of knowledge that I have, I like to pass on where I can. But the idea of having to go through all of the bureaucracy would be hell for me. So my next question based on that is, why did you leave teaching?
I think a number of reasons, really. It's complicated, and and some things are sort of you move on from it, really. But I think it is a slog, and I think my day to day now is so much easier. The main focus of any day is writing blogs, newsletters for clients. I might have one or two meetings. Might top off the day with a lovely podcast like this, or do a bit of LinkedIn. But it's very simple. Whereas actually, teaching is incredibly complicated, and I've got my evenings back now, my weekends. I read far more. I get through far more fiction over the course of the year. I mean, that's very telling how much more I read these days. The irony is that teachers don't have enough time for these things. My wife's a teacher still, and she loves it. But I just wanted. It's nice also, a bit like Andrew Thorpe said, the idea that you can reinvent yourself. And I think the fact that I've had different careers is really interesting. It's nice to suddenly do something which is connected, but also very different day to day.
That makes a lot of sense. And also, you were specifically an English teacher, so that connection is even closer, I imagine. And as you say, which is kind of ironic in its own way, you weren't able to read quite as much when you were an English teacher, but it must help a lot when you are speaking to customers or potential customers and trying to persuade them to hire you, that you've kind of done this all of your life. This has been your career to be able to write well. Does that influence your potential buyer?
Yeah, very much so. I think, I studied English at university, as you'd expect. You become hyper aware of how language works, and you become very aware of patterns in language. And so, like yourself, you get very good at spotting. You can spot conventions of different types of content and copy very, very quickly, I guess, get a sense of tones of voice. And also, having been a teacher, I'm able to get into their heads. It's not a big imaginative leap for me to think, okay, what bothers teachers when I'm, a lot of stuff I write is sort of technical stuff where it's about writing about ed technology. So I can get a feel for how that might actually help teachers in their classroom or in their day-to-day lives. So yeah, I mean, very closely aligned, as you see.
That makes sense. So the level of empathy that you need is a lot easier to reach to help them out. You were talking there about different tones of voice and different styles of writing and different versions of copy. You wrote something today that, well, I don't know when you wrote it. You posted something today on LinkedIn, which I absolutely loved. So how often do you write as you speak?
Yeah, I'm glad I got away with today's LinkedIn post because I posted that about 3 years ago.
Oh, really?
And it got a nice reception. And I thought, these things move on so quickly, don't they? And people don't see. I don't expect people. I'm not on LinkedIn every day. And so, obviously we repurpose stuff. So I wrote that about sort of 3 years ago, and people were nice about it. And I know people commented there. I thought, you must have commented about this 3 years ago. But yeah, so it's all about writing as you speak. And I'm just very interested in the editing, and how we edit things. So actually things do sound like you speak, and so it's very readable. A lot of stuff I'm writing it's that fine balance, isn't it? If people wrote a transcript of me speaking now, it'd sound horribly messy, but we all know that actually, good dialogue, good scripts, good newsletters, a lot of art goes into that, isn't it? There's sort of, it's hidden art, isn't it? The art of concealing art, I think, is what Thomas Hardy says. So this idea, the art of concealing art, is what it's all about, really.
It's a beautiful phrase in itself, and it's true. I was speaking to somebody recently where they asked me a question about how do I cope with the idea of being constrained when I have to write something about a particular subject area or about a particular item, and I have a very, very quick deadline that I have to get to.
Yeah.
And my answer was, well, I just write at first, and I write almost anything, and it can be complete nonsense. The skill comes later. I don't think I use these words. I'm stealing them from you now, but the skill comes later when you have to edit it and you have to then work out, well, does this sound good? Does this sound awful? Does it make sense? Does it fit the tone of voice? At first, often we're just gushing out everything we can.
Yeah, you've got to, haven't you? It's that whole write drunk, edit sober. I mean, we're both writing to deadlines. We're not precious about it. We just got to get the stuff on the page. And then, as Gary Nightingale was saying, it's all about just getting black on white, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Getting black and white. I thought that was a great phrase as well.
Yeah.
I can't remember where that originally came from. I
think he was talking about Raymond Carver, maybe. I think. Yeah.
Yes, I believe so. But that's it. That's exactly it. You sometimes it's quite a lot of the time, it's literally a case of if you don't get it out, you'll never be able to structure it and reform it later. So you have to get something down. Taking that away from work, do you write for fun often? Is that something that you do? You sit down and just write whatever it is that you enjoy writing?
Not loads, actually. I quite I find my day-to-day fun, and I like writing stuff for LinkedIn.
That's a good point. I should say I agree with you on that.
No, and I don't think you're implying the contrary, but I think and that takes up a lot of time, a lot of energy. You can only write. That's the worst thing about our jobs, I think, is that I find I can only write chargeable hours of sort of 4 or 5 hours of the day. And and after that I'm absolutely drained. I'm shattered. The well runs dry. I love writing for fun, stuff of mine, say, but it tends to be non-fiction stuff and about the craft of writing for stuff like LinkedIn. I'd love to write, a novel at some stage, but it's just, what's the line I read the other day? The road to hell is paved with sort of works in progress or something like that. And yeah, I've got a good 10. I've got a good 10 sort of abandoned drafts of novels, and the big thing, the best advice for any writer is just finish something, something. I've not followed that advice in relation to writing fiction, but I do think for me, and I think for most people, you have to immerse yourself into it. You have to immerse yourself in it. And I think, Stephen King, who's the #1 master of not just telling a great story, but how to write, he says, you just got to write it at speed, write a novel every 3 months, write for 2-3 hours every morning, just get it on the page. Because if you don't do that, you lose momentum, you lose interest in your own story. And that is just death to any story.
That's true. I'm in a similar boat. There are a lot of pieces I have written for fun and then have been left and put to one side.
You've got a grand plan to turn it back on you, Stefano, then. So, you write stuff and you write poetry. Have you got any sort of grand ambitions or not?
I'm not sure I would say I have grand ambitions. I did start writing a slightly different take on a poetry book and did what you have done. I got to a certain point and then got busy and as you say, felt tired after working and writing for clients and didn't focus on the book and then almost forgot about the book. So maybe this is encouragement to get back to it. So no, I wouldn't say I necessarily have any kind of grand plan, but I would enjoy, I think, finishing something at some point.
I think one thing that's true is that, when you look at writers and you look at their careers, say that, you've got to write a lot of rubbish to write good stuff. And so, that's really painful. It's a really brave thing to do because, if you look at, say, and this is even just look at early Shakespeare, his early stuff like Titus Andronicus, a lot of it's just melodrama and there's glimpses of gems in there, but a lot of it's just arguably trash. And then he produces things like Hamlet, but we're talking about a long journey there. And, a lot of writers try to bury their first novels because they're embarrassed by them. They're too autobiographical. They're too self-revealing. And actually, that's a really painful thing to do. I think I admire anyone that's successful with writing fiction and particularly get stuff published because there is that period. Whenever you look at, say, a Bronte or somebody, they've been writing all their lives, haven't they? From the, Bronte's writing from the age of 9 or 10. I've just been reading a biography of the Brontes. So, they're writing from the age of 8 or 9, for each other. They've got an apprenticeship of like 10, 12 years there before they all of a sudden overnight become sensations, So it's a long journey, really. I feel very comfortable writing non-fiction, writing content for clients, to be honest, about education.
It's interesting what you say there, though, about the overnight sensation. I think that expands beyond writing too, actually. It often goes into lots of different careers, and people sometimes talk about overnight sensations of singers and actors and how it seems like they suddenly became the #1 actor in the world and they're getting this Oscar or they're suddenly #1 in the charts. And occasionally that does happen, especially with more modern things like X Factor and all of the talent shows. But quite often, there's a lot of work that's gone on in the background. And as you say, there's an apprenticeship. I like the term apprenticeship for that. You're learning as you go. And then coming back to writing, you're right. It's brave. It's brave to let your rubbish out. It's brave to show people what you think is awful. And quite often what happens with that is sometimes the reception is, it's awful. Which is hard, but sometimes the reception is actually more pleasurable than you might expect because writers are often we're our own harshest critics. I believe, and we're always comparing ourselves to others. And hopefully nobody is stupid enough to compare themselves to Shakespeare, but we might compare ourselves to more contemporary writers. We might compare ourselves to our peers who also haven't been published, etc. And so,
it's heartbreaking to produce that stuff and to get knocked back. I think it's, a lot of the writers that are very successful, they very wisely, they fail in private, don't they? Hilary Mantel, I mean, I live on the South Coast or nearby. She lives just down the road in Bully Salterton. She didn't tell anybody that she was writing fiction. Her husband was successful. She was writing in private. When people asked her what she did, she just said, I toddle about, I'm a housewife. And she was writing, she was getting obsessed by the Tudors for 15, 20 years. And then, she starts to publish some amazing fiction. Another example would be a girl I taught actually about 15 years ago called Abigail Dean, who's on the bestseller list now. I think she was number 4 Times bestseller list with a book called Girl A. We go back in time. I mean, she's a big sensation now. She will be. She's appearing on lots of podcasts at the moment. So we go back a couple of years. She was unhappy with her job as a solicitor, as a barrister in London. She took time out. She wrote for sort of 3 months. She managed to get through a third of her draft of Girl A. When she got an agent, suddenly it was subject to a bidding war, a 9-way bidding war.
Wow.
The UK publishers made an offer of 6 figures. US made an offer of 7 figures, and Sony bought the film rights. Now, and Girl A, I finished it a couple of months back, very, very, brilliantly well-paced, brilliantly plotted book. It's about a child, a woman surviving neglect and, a house of horrors. It's a pretty sort of gruesome read in some ways. But, we backtrack, look at Abby, fiercely bright, big reader, has done lots of fan fiction. Both her parents were English teachers. Clearly, she was taught by me. So, it can't all be fortuitous, but there's a journey there. So it's like when you look at any sort of great artist. She had to write that novel. She felt she wasn't that happy she wanted to. She felt she was neglecting that hunger in herself. I think all artists just have this hunger. They can't not produce stuff, and that's what holds me back. I think is I'm quite happy just churning out a bit of stuff for LinkedIn occasionally and stuff for clients. And most, the true artists, it's like an itch that they can't but scratch, isn't it?
It is. I agree with that. By the way, well done. I hope you're getting. I hope you're getting some of the royalties.
There's a mention for our English department very sweetly in the back. So that's lovely. Yeah,
that is lovely. I feel like money would be better, but a mention is nice.
It's like when we're asked, Stefano, when we're asked to do stuff for exposure.
Yeah, exactly.
Exposure.
Actually, we'll move on to that in a second. That's a very good point, maybe. But what I loved about that story is, as you say, there's an artist's itch. There's something where we're always producing something on the side. We're always trying to mold and to craft our skill. It sounds like an amazing story, by the way, Girl A. I'm going to have to go and find it.
Girl A is a fantastic read. I think, I look forward to what, she's on to her next novel, Abby, and I think she's got some great writing ahead of her already because she's got the craft there. Yeah.
Fantastic. But with yourself, you mentioned that you feel comfortable writing daily for clients, and I do as well. I love writing for clients, and actually, it gives me a thrill to be able to create in that way every day. I still also have my love for writing fiction and nonsense most of the time. But do you have any kind of itch at all? Because you mentioned that you started some novels, and you mentioned that you never quite finished them. Is that because the itch isn't there, or is that because something else got in the way?
I think if at some stage when my clients all abandon me, maybe that's when the novel will get written. Okay. I did start, and I started a novel last year actually for my son. And I produced something for him. I got sort of 30 pages into it, and then work got busy again. I lost. I don't know about you, but back last year, 12 months ago, I lost lots of work overnight because everyone obviously battened down the hatches, and who can blame them? So I was fine with it. I did think 12 months ago, I thought you're just going to write off the next year. Things have picked up. I've been very lucky because education's a pretty buoyant market, really. So I had time, and actually, the pandemic has played into the hands of people who are providing technology for schools. I mean, it's been a huge boom for the industry. So I had a little bit of dead time. So one, you do your sort of reading CPD and you review your services and your systems and stuff. But I did enjoy writing that novel for a little time. Maybe I'll go back to it. I think things can be abandoned. You can go back to them. I mean, I said before that it can be it can be death to a story to lose momentum. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, Tolkien wrote a line, didn't he? He wrote something like, in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. And then he wrote that and then he left it for like 10 or so years. So
I didn't actually know that. I hadn't heard that.
He had that first line, I think, very early on and then just abandoned it. And then, I think we all love storytelling. It's a human thing, isn't it? And I do like storytelling at my laptop because I don't see, I'm all in all fairly sort of introverted, and I feel a lot happier being able to edit stuff. As you say, you can write the rubbish and then you can. Oh, yeah. I'm not the guy in the pub that people listen to. I've got friends who. I'm fascinated by the idea that raconteurs in real life, in person, aren't necessarily people who can get it on the page. I'm absolutely fascinated by what's going on there. But anyway, so I digress.
No, but you make a very good point. There is often a difference between Andrew Thorpe, who we've mentioned here today, and we'll link to him at the in the show notes of this podcast because he's the person worth investigating further. But he is very much a raconteur. His storytelling is off the cuff. And he has.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And he actually says it himself. He says he has an internal library. So depending on the situation, he will know which story to take out of the library and to read at the right time.
Like an old jukebox, isn't it? Yeah.
That's it. That's exactly it. But what I find interesting about that is it's also something he teaches his clients, so that when they are in the kind of situations where they may be trying to sell something, that they understand how to use their environment and the stories around them to connect on a deeper level with whoever it is they're speaking to. It's something which I try to do as well, nowhere near as well as Andrew. But I also think that from a writing point of view, this is what both of us do, is we have a little bit more time then. And so we can search a bit deeper into the library and get reference points and speak to the librarian to point us in the right direction when we're doing our research. Do you find that when you're writing for your clients, that stories are a major part of that writing and stories are how you then connect with your audience, or do you use different methods?
I think it's very much dependent on the context, really, and the client, and it depends on the content you're writing. I really enjoy interviewing people for trade magazines and then writing up their life stories. I mean, that can be enormously rewarding. That can be great fun. A lot of stuff I write for education is explaining technology and education technology, how it works in classrooms, or about education marketing. And so a lot of the stuff I'm writing is it's either analytical or it's almost bridging. One of my phrases is sort of bridging the gap between educators and innovators. So it's trying to explain how things work, and trying to make them seem less abstract and more concrete. So I might sometimes write something like day in the life of a particular software product or something. So it's a real mix, and that's not. I mean, I'm sure they'll accept that answer in the sense it is really complicated. Sometimes we tell stories, but we just refer to them very briefly, don't we? Without, it connects with the reader. Yes. Obviously you pick on sort of pain points and problems, and then you solve them, say in a ebook or a brochure for a product, say.
That makes sense, and I think we probably work in quite similar ways. So stories often come through in what I'm doing for clients, and they are an important part. But actually, the result of those stories and what you are touching on when you're telling those stories are so important too. For what you're doing, you're explaining things, and so stories can help to explain. And sometimes you need to understand what the end result is going to be, but also why it is you need to use a particular methodology, or a particular piece of technology, or a particular product, etc. So I imagine that those kind of thoughts come into your head quite a lot before you put anything down.
Because I suspect that you and Andrew are very much doing similar things, in the sense that you're very much picking up on your clients' stories, which I do sometimes, but a lot of the time, actually, I'm picking up on the readers' stories. So I'm, writing often for teachers, or writing products that are aimed to help teachers. I'm trying to pick up on the teachers' problems and their everyday frustrations. So I pick up on their stories rather than my clients' stories. And that's often the lead in, really. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, it's quite similar to what I do. I can't speak for Andrew, but yes, we're sometimes working with the client stories themselves, and we're using the client stories to connect them with their audience and their clients. But what we're also doing is exactly what you mentioned there. We're working out what the pain points are for the client, what exactly is troubling them at the moment in time, and how we can connect what our clients do to what their clients do, what their clients need.
Yeah, because one case in point, without naming names, sometimes clients will ask me to write about awards that they've won, which can be really persuasive in some ways. But in many ways, the user of the product doesn't give a stuff about awards that the clients have won. No. They're worried about the fact that something that frustrates them in the course of their day. And so that's the story they're interested in.
How do you go about gently persuading them to maybe slightly change the style of writing about a particular award or something along those lines?
That's a great question, to which I don't know the answer. It's tricky, isn't it? I'm in the game I've been in the game, I don't know about you, 4.5 years now. So I feel a lot more, experience counts for a lot, doesn't it? So I think in the early couple of years, when you're just grateful for work, I feel I've got a better handle on not dealing with clients. I mean, the best content, the best copy is collaborative, isn't it? And you have that, you don't just throw content at them and say, as long as they're paying and the invoices are, being sort of addressed quickly. I feel a lot more confident now in relation to saying, well, is this what you really want? And again, it's context dependent, because sometimes your trade mags want awards and all the rest of it. So it's always interesting. I mean, that it's a perennial question, isn't it? A perennial struggle, I think, for agencies and for the likes of ourselves. Is the client right? Is it the customer? It is very, very complicated, isn't it?
It is indeed. I know that when we're speaking to our clients, often we try, and maybe we're giving away too many secrets. I'm giving away too many secrets here, but we we try and help them to understand that when we're writing, that we are not writing for them, that we are writing for their audience. And then we, one of the things that we often do is I ask them where they go and buy something. I make up a particular product, and they go into a hardware shop to buy a drill. I don't know. And you say, okay, so if you went into a hardware shop to buy a drill, and 4 of them had won awards for being great drills, #1 drills, which one would you buy? And they're like, oh, I don't know, I need more information. Exactly. so that's how we sometimes work with our clients. We kind of put them into the buyer's position rather than the seller's.
Exactly. And just a little story to illustrate that. I would say that I am, as I'm sure you are, straight as a die when it comes to, being honest with clients, because, they're paying for our advice and for our experience. They've got time to research, forums and review sites and the industry in the same way. When we look at it from a different angle, and we can give a fresh perspective. But you've got to be honest, because it goes back to teaching. Actually, I always remember sometimes we pussyfoot around, and parents' evenings are always priceless conversations, great stories then. And when we live in a world, we talked about this before about my dad and tea and sympathy. We live in a world where we have to be a little bit more careful with our language. So sometimes you want to say to a parent, look, your child is lazy as he's a lazy so-and-so. And the danger is in the world we have today, where we can sort of say, oh yes, not quite applying himself, or you've only got 5-10 minutes and people are queuing up. I remember one parent saying I was being too economical with the truth. I'm thinking this child is just bone idle. And then the parent said it as if it were a great revelation at the end of the meeting. Do you know what, Mr. Masters? Do you know what I think, actually, at the end of it? I think he's just very, very lazy. And I'm thinking, really, I should just said that first minute. And then you obviously provide the evidence, don't you? I think, I'm always enjoyed looking back on that conversation, but I think if you can provide quantifiable evidence and the like, then, you show what works, and that, I mean, the clients want that guidance, don't they? And you want their guidance as well.
That's really interesting as well. I think your frustration would have been quite clear. I imagine that you didn't just say he's lazy, but at the same time, I imagine that if you had have said that, you probably would have got some kind of bad reaction for saying it. So what you did was the right approach, because, as you say, you were showing rather than telling, and then they worked it out for themselves to an extent. And I think actually that's kind of what we do as writers when we're writing for clients too, is we try and work out. You can say, for example, if you're trying to bestow the virtues of going to one client over another, they might say, well, everything we provide is great quality. It's the best quality in the world. Is it though? Is it really? Does anyone believe you? Whereas if you can describe the manufacturing process, if you're talking about, I don't know, extra virgin olive oil, and you say that it has to go through the press 3 times rather than just once, or if you're describing the number of years that wine has fermented for.
But yeah, if you can conjure up holidays in those sort of Tuscan groves and those olive trees and the family history, and we latch onto the concrete, don't we, over the abstract. And I completely agree. Yeah,
that's it. And so that's why I think you probably were able to make your point about the lazy child without having to call them a lazy child, because it's all about showing rather than telling.
Going back to drills, I don't know if you've seen this drill advert online at the moment or on television. It's called something like, for those who need a good hole maker. Now, I'm a DIY dud. So this guy had this great drill. And, and it was saying, I can't remember, I've seen it just the once, so my memory will sort of play tricks, but it was saying, for those people that need a hole maker. And that's how I describe a drill. I don't know the names for all this stuff. And it just tapped into me, I thought, they understand me. I want a hole maker. I like I always love that idea. You don't sell a drill, you sell a hole. I don't want a drill, I just want a hole. And so, but it's just a lovely bit of copy, I thought, that it's genius bit of sort of pastiche and parody.
I haven't seen it, but it is brilliant. It sounds fantastic. As you say, you're selling the benefit. You're selling exactly what the end result is. And I'm the same as you. I'm no idea on DIY, so I wouldn't know all of the different types of drill bits, or I'm not even sure if that's the right term. So
No, it is actually. It is. Yeah. Don't blind me with science now, Stefano.
Sorry, I swallowed the dictionary. But yeah, so you're right. You're selling the benefits, and I would like a hole maker as well. But it actually takes me to something I noticed earlier on when I do the odd little bit of research. It's a very, very small.
I know you do. You're doing great with these podcasts. I love listening to them the last few weeks. I mean, you seem like you got such wonderful momentum, and I love how different the people are. It's so sort of wonderfully diverse, and just in terms of people's backgrounds and their storytelling. Listening to Kayla Conley read her stuff about her child in Jamaica was lovely. Gary Nightingale, very different. It just took me back to the 70s, and really sort of powerful writing, wasn't it? And then you got Andrew Thorpe. I thought, great guns at the moment. You must be really delighted.
I am, thank you. Yes, and it's to be honest, it's got nothing to do with me really. It's all to do with you and the other guests that come on. I just ask a few questions, and you guys take over and tell stories, which is
no, it's two-way. It's two-way, of course.
I appreciate that, but. What I was my little bit of research that I did on you, and you were mentioning earlier the line, and you said, what was the line on the drills? You repeat it again. So
for those people that need hole makers.
For those people that need hole makers, and that were the words you remembered from that advert. You didn't explain to me fully the visuals of the advert or anything like that at all. You purely thought about the words and how they resonated with you. And something that I noticed, I think it was on your LinkedIn profile, was that you said the visuals get noted, and you can finish this sentence. But
it's the copy that gets quoted.
Yes,
I find that's a bit corny, really, but I wrote that a long time ago. Some people seem to like, it's one of those things, isn't it? Some people will love that and some people will hate it. But I think, although it's a bit of a corny rhyme, I think there's such a truth there that, you know, we forget how important actually what we're selling is. You know, the words, visuals are hugely important. Of course they are. But words are still the currency, and, you know, ideas are the currency of the web, aren't they, and the world out there. And, you know, I think we undersell ourselves sometimes, in relation to what we're offering. But anyway,
I think so too. And you're right, it is a little bit corny, but half of the stuff that I say is corny, and it's got some kind of cliche underneath it. So it's all good. I wouldn't worry about it. but often with these cliches and with these corny sayings, when you look into them, there's some kind of truth behind them. There's a reason somebody's put pen to paper with these notes in the first place. So people are going to want to find out how they can hire you to write all of these corny quotes. Hopefully,
I just say that is hopefully atypical of me. I don't know how you found it, but I must say, I think when you start in this business, you start off in freelance writing. It's almost like you want to show all your tricks and skills and all the whole kit, and, you know, it's like a dancer wants to show off all their moves. And it doesn't take long, but you do learn very quickly just to simplify. Yes. And actually, it's about the what rather than, you know, dwelling too much on the how. I think the way I write now is 1,000 times better than the work I did for my early clients.
Don't say that; they'll be asking for a refund or at least a discount. So. but as you,
where will they find me?
Yes, how do people find you?
Yeah, so I occasionally sort of dip into LinkedIn. And I've got a website, Ben Masters Copy, and I'm sure there'll be a link in there, but it's very easy to sort of find me, all in all. So so thanks for mentioning that. That's great.
Not at all. I love the modesty of, you can find me here. I don't really want to tell you how to find me, but it's brilliant.
No, well, there aren't many. There are many Ben Masters on LinkedIn. Actually, fortunately, I know on the internet. I think there's a Ben Masters who's an actor who's in some sort of American drama. And when I was setting up my website, I remember thinking, "Oh no, so everyone's going to go into this thinking I'm some US actor." So I was going to have some. I think someone else has got a website now who's another Ben Masters who is saying, "Look, I'm not the US actor," so that line was taken. But yeah,
you can say I am an actor. It just I act through my.
I'm another actor called Ben Masters.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. Right. On that wonderful note, I think it's Louis Theroux who says it's always good to end the podcast on laughter. We will stop. But of course, for those of you who are regular listeners, you will know that we will end, as we always do, with a story. A morning in Cook's kitchen. It's 7:30 a.m. William, the worktop, is just waking up, but he is not feeling at his best. What happened last night? He asks himself. He looks down at his top. There is red stuff all over it. Is it blood? No. Surely it's just ketchup, he thinks. There is a strange smell though, and the colours are not quite right. How much did I drink? As he becomes more aware of his surroundings, he notices a half portion of chips lying by his side. Not again, he cries. He still has the scar from the knife attack the last time he had a night like this. Meanwhile, Hayley the Hob is all set for another party. Be it day or night, she is always ready. It is getting on to 7:40 a.m, and usually she'd have felt something by now, so she's a little worried, but she still has faith. Finally, there it is, a feeling like no other. The smell of gas, the press of a button, and bam! She feels it. That energy, that spark that she has been waiting for. Suddenly she feels like she's on fire, like she can take on the world. She knows that it's not a good idea to burn out. That's why her relationships never last, but that feeling is so intense that she's not sure if she can stop herself. Ollie the oven is in his usual place next to Hayley. He enjoys it there. They have similar ideas on life and get on well. He does have a different outlook on relationships though. Whilst like Hayley he loves that initial spark, he's in it for the long haul. He has never managed to hold down a permanent relationship, but it is rarely Ollie that ends it. Sometimes it seems like it's so unfair. His last romance was with the sizzling Priscilla the Potato, but just as everything turned golden, she left without saying a word. Some of the other guys think it's because Ollie rarely has a bath. Maybe Ollie is catching on. The clock has just struck 8 a.m. and he's getting the clean of his life. Finley the floor is feeling very low. He is watching everyone around him seemingly so happy, but it always seems like they are treading on him to get there. He's sure that nobody likes him. The other guys are always throwing food at him, but worse still, the love of his life, Hayley, has never so much looked at him. She always seems to smell amazing, so why does she hang around with Ollie so much? He just can't understand it. Often he wishes that he could be more like Felix the fridge. He's so cool, and he is always waiting to open up and let things in. Felix is, as usual, just chilling. He likes to hang out with all the cool kids, but if the other guys are honest, they know that they just wouldn't be cool without him. In fact, just the other night, he noticed that one of his best friends, Mandy the Meatball, became very hot-headed. Felix can't help but blame Hayley. He likes Hayley because he likes everybody, but he can never understand why she has to be such a bad influence. Mandy spent just one evening with her, and he hasn't seen her since. You've just been listening to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We'll be back very soon, so make sure you subscribe and catch up on any of the episodes you've missed.